Raise some
Cane. You gotta raise some cane. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some cane, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some cane.
Welcome to Raising Cane, to the Raising Cane Show. I'm Nate Cane, your host, and we are thrilled to have Dr. Tim Murphy join us for an enlightening conversation tonight. Dr. Murphy is a renowned psychologist, former congressman, and author known for his extensive work in mental health advocacy and policy reform. With a career spanning the Pennsylvania State Senate, the U.S. House of Representatives, and the U.S. Navy Reserve, Dr. Murphy has dedicated his life to serving others. His latest book, The Christ Cure, provides a faith-based approach to healing from trauma and PTSD. Get ready for an inspiring discussion on resilience, recovery, and the power of faith in overcoming life's challenges. Dr. Murphy, it is an honor to have you on the show tonight. For those who may not be familiar with your work, can you start by sharing a little bit about your background and what led you to focus on mental health, particularly in the context of trauma and PTSD?
Sure, and thank you so much. It is great to meet you and to be on your show. I'm a psychologist by training, so I went on to graduate school and practiced at hospitals and clinics for many years. You mentioned I was involved with politics. Don't hold that against me. But I was a state senator in Pennsylvania and represented the southwest corner of the state in the United States House of Representatives. So I'm more of a covering politician. But on the serious side, when I was in Congress, I was voting to send people to war and to fund them. But I also knew that we had a lot of young men and women and middle-aged men and women too, who were facing the atrocities of war and coming back and struggling with that. So I actually was discussing one time with the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Michael Mullen, about, I wanted to be a Navy psychologist years ago, but I was in my 50s now. And he said, well, we could use you now. And I said, love to. Do I need an age waiver? He said, we'll get that. So 9 months later, I was on the hangar deck of the USS Eisenhower taking the oath and went on to serve 8 years in the Navy at Walter Reed. It was Bethesda Naval Hospital when I started, but it was changed to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center at Bethesda on a traumatic brain injury and PTSD unit. So I did that while I was in Congress. I would actually go down to the hospital on Tuesdays and Thursdays and put in a day of boots on the ground work there at the hospital and then come back to the Capitol and vote. And then when I left the House, I founded a program for veterans and first responders dealing with a whole host of issues, depression, anxiety, trauma, or just the readjustment blues after one leaves the service. And that's what I do now. That's my practice. I focus on that in a traditional psychological sense. But also what I really realized is there is a massive amount of research, Nate, which tells us that people who are struggling with trauma in their lives, and by the way, about 70% of the population will face trauma sometimes in our lives. Mm-hmm. But people who are struggling with that do much better if they are religious. And I don't mean just believers, but I mean really practice religious faith, not just meditation, not just mindfulness, not a calm walk in the woods. Those are all helpful. But it really is the belief in God and a practicing religion and understanding there's something out there which means we are never alone. We are always with presence of God and always taken care of. So I incorporated that into my work. I always had it somewhat in there. Most psychologists are not only not trained in the area of religion and faith and psychology and that nexus, but actually were actively encouraged to stay away, off limits. You don't touch politics
Right.
or religion with your clients. And I thought, well, wait a minute, that's a big issue. About 60% of people want their counselor to be able to talk about God and faith and religion. And unfortunately, most psychologists are atheists or agnostics. So even if they wanted to, they'd be totally incapable of it. And one other thing, clergy, only about 15% of clergy say that they feel that they are skilled enough to counsel people, even though most people who have a mental health issue will go to clergy for help.
Mm.
So I wrote this book. Really, I should say it's a very painful book for me to write, because I did a lot of soul searching myself, but it's a very hopeful book to read. Because what I discovered in this is looking at the life of the Apostle Paul, who had faced myriads of traumas, beatings and whippings and imprisonments and nearly drowning at sea and run out of town. And that's just the beginning. He should have had PTSD with insomnia and suicide and chronic illness, all kinds of, but he didn't. So I actually searched for a book that would answer the question of, why didn't he have PTSD? And there had not been one written. So I wrote one called The Christ Cure, 10 Biblical Ways to Heal from Trauma, Tragedy, and PTSD. It's a lot of stories of not only people in the military or first responders, but regular folks who have faced awful situations in their lives and came out on top. I mean, really stronger, faster, better, smarter, not despite what happened to us, but because of what happened to us, and be able to incorporate that into our lives and make us stronger. So it's a book of hope and healing, and that's where it stands now.
Wow. It's interesting. I've made the observation myself. Obviously, I think most Americans have had some form of counseling at one point in time in their life or another. I certainly have. And one of the things that I remember was the first counselor that I ever met with was somebody who I don't think they believed in God. And it made it very difficult for me to have a conversation with them in any seriousness, because I did have a faith in God. And so I'm glad to see somebody in the profession of psychology, that is incorporating that, because it is certainly, a big part of a lot of people's lives. And I do think that my faith has given me the ability to heal rapidly, much more rapidly, mainly because it's focused on things like forgiveness and not just forgiving for the sake of that person, but for my own self and for my own ability to be able to move on. And so
Right.
I'm really curious to get into your book, and now so you mentioned Paul. What in particular, you got into a little bit about Paul's things, but what struck you the most when it came to Paul more than anyone else? I mean, was it because of the epistles that he wrote and the history that there is about him, or?
Yeah, I mean, look where he started off. He grew up fairly intelligent, led by or taught by one of the great rabbis of his time. He was from Tarsus, a city with very metropolitan, lots of philosophers there, and very learned place. A lot of cosmopolitans, people travel through there.
Hmm.
But he was also his part of the Jewish faith was really focused a great deal on protecting the faith. And what he would do is understand that the Jews for centuries recognized whenever they didn't do something right, they would end up wandering the desert for 70 years or 40 years. Or look, when the 12 were sent out by Moses to go and find the land of milk and honey, and 10 came back and said, we can't do this, it's terrible. And 2 said, no, we can conquer. And so those 10 didn't get to go there. Moses didn't get to go because of his doubts over time. The things that happened over time, they recognized we better follow the rules and stick with it. Now, by the rules, I mean, they had some 613 rules that they followed, and they were very, very strict about that. But one of the things they also were very strict about is making sure that no one had a false Messiah. They expected a Messiah, but they didn't want a false one. Certainly not someone who'd been nailed to a tree, because it very specifically worries them that was a criminal, and they couldn't have a criminal who was a Messiah. So Paul was, part of his job was he was a persecutor, a prosecutor, executor, as he would hunt down Jews. Excuse me, he would hunt down heretics and blasphemers who were threats to Jew. And this was also politically important because the Romans had this tenuous but supportive relationship with the Jews. Said, you keep your folks under control, we'll leave you alone. The Jews had helped the Romans in some conquering some areas too. So that had to be there. So given this tension agreement, it was very important. That's why the Romans said, okay, you do what you got to do and take care of this. Well, Paul was an enforcer. And then along came this time, he got his papers. He was headed up to Tarsus to find and round up some more of these blaspheming people who believed in Christ. They weren't called Christians yet, but they believed this Nazarene was there. And on the road to Tarsus, you know the story, a bright light, a voice says, Paul, or Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Saul was his Jewish name, his Hebrew name. And Paul went blind, one of the traumas. And you can look back and say, well, those times he executed people. In the book of Acts, it says that he stood by when Stephen was stoned to death. How many other killings did he witness? Other traumas. And then he switched altogether. He became a believer. He disappeared for a while. That's just the beginning of these. So what I see is all these traumas which shook him up to the core, what he believed in, what he was trying to do. And the people he trusted before now became after him. The people who didn't trust him before, he was trying to befriend them. And he would go from town to town and try and preach. And sometimes they'd throw him out. They'd have plots against him. They didn't want to kill him. And he just kept going. And although he recognized at times it was difficult, he still said, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to be sleepless. I know what it's like to be these things. But he says, I can do this because he believed and his faith saved him through that.
So, everyone faces tragedy and pain at some point in their life, and the effects of grieving and depression can linger. What are some of the steps that you discuss in your book that help people so that they can work towards healing from these tragedies that they've experienced?
So what happens is for all of us recognizing at some point in our life, as I said, 70% of the population will face trauma. Most have already faced that. And in that population too, we have that about 20% will have some lingering symptoms. And those could be sleep problems, relationship problems, struggling to maintain a relationship, divorce. You can more susceptible to chronic illnesses and acute illnesses because your stress levels are so high. You have anger and depression and anxiety are there. A fear of things, maybe being hypersensitive to sounds and smells, all these things. So we know those are going to be there for people who are overwhelmed with this. So the best thing I say to do is to really start off to build your own resilience in life. Now, recognize in this that means you got to make some choices. Now, resilience is building up before the battle, before the problem. This is something we should be doing every day. And these are choices. In Luke's gospel, and Jesus would oftentimes present, you got to do this or this. You can't go in between. Make a choice, good or bad. Make a decision. Don't be lukewarm. I'll spit you out. Do these things. And this means you have to choose strength instead of weakness. That means whatever you do mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, you choose it strong. So we all have heard the things about staying in shape. We've heard the things about, hey, just you don't have to park your car right next to the store. Take a little bit extra walk, lift something up, do a little workout. But mentally, do things every day that boost your mental strength too. Mental games, read things, understand, learn more. Because if you choose the weak side of things, when things get tough, your mind's not going to be very sharp. So you want to do the physical, the mental, and emotional strength too. Choose sometimes difficult decisions. Work your way through that. Learn how to handle things emotionally, because the small accomplishments will help us with big ones. And spiritually, stay strong through prayer and other aspects there. Another part of resilience is self-discipline. Choose to stay in a routine, to stick to things. Paul was really adamant about these things. You have to work at it. He used the example in Corinth. He would watch the athletes training. Corinth was this little isthmus in Greece. And so ships would come up there, unload their goods, and carry the goods over land while the ship went around because it was more dangerous. So that means there was a lot of visitors there packed into Corinth. Now, Corinth was a bit of a love city. They were up on the mountaintop, a big brothel, 5,000 or 10,000 workers were there. And But there was also, for entertainment, there were these games, the Isthmian Games, every 2 years, the Olympics every 4. And so there was all these athletes who would wrestle, who would race, who would have all these events. And Paul saw him training because he had a front row seat on the main street there in Corinth where he was making tents. But he would watch them and he said, Mike, these guys are so disciplined. Every day they keep working because there's only one prize. Back in those days, there was no bronze or silver medal. You won or you lost. That was it. And he said, life is like that too. You got to play to win. Don't play to be second place. So again, that's mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And the next part of that, to build your resilience, is humility. Sounds like a strange thing there, but when I did some work in the Navy, I did active duty training time with Navy SEAL teams. I got to be with them, let's say that. But part of the selection process for Navy SEALs, we'd go through a lot of psychological tests and interviews. And I remember asking the commander of SEAL Team 6, what's the number one personality characteristic you look for, not just in the SEALs, but the people who work with them? He said humility. Because if you're not humble, you're not going to learn. You're not going to come back and say, I made a mistake, or I need to learn this. And that is what we need to have too. Because if we face life with arrogance and hubris, we're going to be pretty, stupid. And we're going to make a lot of mistakes. And the other thing about building our resilience is having goals in life. Like, where are you going? What are you going to do? You can't just wander or bounce around like a pinball, or you have to have some goals. All of these things together start to build us up. And we look, hey, Paul had these things. He was very self-disciplined. He always talked about these strengths. He was very humble, and he always had goals working for. So that's the baseline. That's the bottom line for this. And if I could mention the next step too, the next step is resistance. What do we need in a fight? When the problems happen. And one of those things you have to have is courage. The opposite is cowardice. The opposite is giving into fear. But meaning the courage to say, I'm going to have mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual courage to go on with this. Another part is being willing to fight, to have perseverance and endurance, which Paul talked about. Perseverance, I like to think of as the offense, and endurance is the defense. And to surround yourself with a community or a team that are going to be with you, because we know that's what soldiers do. That's what police would do. That's what firefighters do. You have a team working with you. And the other part is to be vigilant, to be aware of what are some of the problems, our own personal weaknesses. This is very important. You may have known this too, Nate, in your life, that our weak spots, it's like a fortress. The weak spot in the fortress isn't the big, thick walls. It's the doorways. And if we're not aware of our weak spots, we're going to be in trouble. So that's the foundation of dealing with some parts. And there's more parts of healing that go with this too.
So in your experience, when you're dealing with, I would say when you're dealing with, say, family members of somebody that maybe they think is PTSD or had trauma, what happens if they don't get help? If they don't, if they don't address these issues, what's the long-term effects of leaving these issues unaddressed? Well,
there's some, again, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual parts of this too. Spiritually, many people turn away, they get angry at God, or they say, there is no God. Why would these things happen to me? Why would God let these things happen? And instead of answering that question, and there isn't an answer for that, we're not puppets, we're not marionettes, we aren't pre-programmed robots. We're given choices, and unfortunately, so are a lot of other people. And things happen to us that we may not deserve, and things happen we do deserve. But it is a matter of addressing that. The other parts, mentally and physically, what happens to us when we are under attack, part of our brain called the amygdala, which is only about as big as the tip of your thumb. That's the fight, flight, fear center of your brain. That is like a smoke detector, sends out signals to the brain and body, alert, we're under attack. And so it sends out a number of chemicals. One is adrenaline or norepinephrine, and that's released to the body to get us ready to fight or flight. And other chemicals for dealing with these things, one is called the cytokines. And cytokines and cortisol is another one. The cytokines can be inflammatory and literally inflame little sections of our brain, much like if you bruise, there's a little inflammation. And that inflammation in the brain actually causes a reaction in us, which feels like depression, anxiety. I didn't say it is, but when we have these physical feelings, I'm tired, I worry about things, I can't get my mind straight, we begin to think, wow, I must be depressed, I must be awful, something terrible is happening. And it does, indeed, it clouds our ability to think. We think poorly, our attention skills are bad, our memory skills are bad, we have trouble going to sleep. So what happens in the long run is that amygdala will continue to fire, because a sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, or memory can set it off. It doesn't have to be a real threat, but just thinking about it can cause our bodies to react exactly, or at least 80% or so, like it was in the first place. So we feel panic and anxiety and struggles, and then our body has that way all over again. What that does to us on the long term is it can leave us physically weak, pain in our joints, more susceptible to chronic illness, acute illness, get the flu more, get infections more, cancer rates are higher, other infection rates are higher. So our body is wearing down and aging in this whole process. We're not getting enough sleep. Sleep is absolutely important for healing here. And so physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, we are headed down unless you address it. And so over time, when people have dealt with this or hid it for years, it's going to continue to gnaw away at them. Now, some people do get better by talking about it, and that's great. That's a great thing, talking it through. The more you talk it through with other people, the more we can address it. But if we try and deny it or delay it or distort it or whatever, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. You know, when people think of PTSD, oftentimes they think, they obviously think about military veterans or, people who, have been in some sort of war zone or something like that. But what I've learned, at least, is that, and I'm sure you obviously know this, but is that this is much more widespread than that. It's much more widespread in our population than just our veterans or police officer that's involved in a shooting or something like that. Can you talk about a little bit about PTSD in particular and what exactly is it and how is it defined?
Well, it's very important those letters of post-traumatic stress disorder. You have to remember there has to be a traumatic event. And a traumatic event is something that is extremely overwhelming to us emotionally, physically. Generally, it's something that is a threat to our life or limb directly, or a witness to it, or it could be a sudden death or a death of a deeply loved person. It could be a financial collapse and disaster. Suddenly our marriage falls apart with a divorce, losing a job. All those are traumatic events. What happens, though, is how much of a threat we see that. So people who are really struggling, they find themselves without a job and without income and devastated. That could be extremely traumatic for them. And in our own minds, we tell ourselves, I can't survive this. I can't make it out of this. There's no hope for me. And here we go back to that religion issue, that if we don't have religion, we don't see hope. There is nothing over the horizon. And that's when people think to give up, nothing else for me. There's no way to go with that. The advantage that people have who have religion, they say, no, I'm never alone, that God is with me at all times. And I will work through this. I've read the Bible and seen many positive aspects of what people can do. But that, as you point out, can happen to anybody. You don't have to be in the military or a first responder to have that happen. It's when one of the key aspects I see about this in relationships, and actually in life too, is abandonment and betrayal. I mean, those are some of the deepest ones when we feel we've been betrayed by our country, by our friends, by a loved one, by the rule of law, like justice has disappeared for us. We feel betrayed. And then you may have seen this too in your own life, Nate, where people you thought would be there to help you, like say, oh, I'm right behind you. I may be 100 miles behind you, but I'm right behind you. And they're really not. They abandon us. And then you say, where do I go now? And that's a huge emotional struggle for us. But again, this is where faith comes in, because God has never abandoned us. He said time and time again, wherever you are, I'll be with you. You are not alone. I'm there. Be strong and courageous. I am there with you. But if you don't have religion, don't have faith, where are you going to go for that? So that's why so many people, we see the suicide rates among veterans is very high. Among police officers, it's high. Early death is high. So people who are dying in their 50s. Divorce rates are high. And that's what we find among people who have unresolved traumatic experiences fall into a lot of these categories with physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health.
I want to shift our conversation to something. We can come back to this as well, but this really, when I look at America today, it seems like we are experiencing a massive mental health crisis. I think some of it's probably related to what went on during COVID, but it seems bigger than that. I mean, like all of the, all the gender dysphoria, it seems like some of it is just society accepting things that really should be classified as mental health issues, and they're treating it as if it's a healthy thing. What are your thoughts on where we are as a country, as a nation, and and what do you see as, we could all talk about the problems, and I think they're evident to everybody, but what do you see are some of the mental health care reforms that need to be enacted into law in order to fix some of this?
Well, there's a lot to your questions. Let me try and take that in steps.
Okay.
We're in a heap of trouble. We really are in a heap of trouble. COVID did several things. The isolation that was pushed upon us was very unhealthy. That never should have happened. Where people were sent to nursing homes to die, and even their loved ones. Heard a story of someone who had been married to his wife for 60 years, and she was dying of cancer, and they wouldn't let him sit in the room. He says, "Look, she's gone. Why can't I be with her?" "Oh no, we're afraid of COVID." He says, "What do I care?" Well, they finally moved her to the first floor and put a chair outside so he could see her through the window. That was some of the cruel idiocy that was imposed on people, or being told you can't go outside. We know that that's the best thing for viruses: go outside in the sunshine. So pulled away from schools during key times in their lives. Maybe those kids never finished school. We know there's high emotional problems of depression, anxiety among kids who were in high school and college during that time. Still not resolved, not recovered from that. So that was something that occurred that was thrust upon us in ways. There was a lot of major mistakes in how that was handled, a lot of major mistakes. And you look at the way some governments handled it. I don't know, let's pick out, Minnesota for one, where they set up hotlines you can call and snitch on your neighbor if they weren't complying. They closed churches around the country, but they kept strip bars open, strip joints and bars, and liquor stores were left open. But by golly, you couldn't have a church open. That shows a lot of the incredible prejudice and bigotry, particularly against Christianity. They get it the most. There's hundreds and hundreds of attacks on churches in the last couple of years because of the way government is actually pushing people to hate religion and other groups hate religion. So these have come through, and you've ended up with people who had overwhelmingly stressful experiences. Kids have also been raised to not be able to handle stress. Parents would rescue them, make sure that everybody got a ribbon, everybody got a trophy, everybody was told you're great, was told you're all going to get A's. What Vice President Kamala Harris has talked about is there should always be equity at the end. We start off at different places, but everybody should win to get it. I mean, can you imagine the Olympics if they told everybody when they're crossing the finish line, you have to wait here till everybody catches up, and then you all get to step over. So at the gold medal podium, you got 20 people standing on top of it. That's what equity means, as opposed to how you work. And if working hard doesn't mean anything, stop working. People realize, wow, I'm trying to do these things, and when we do things and we get better, and there's rewards for it, we realize I can have an impact upon my life. But when we're told, no, you can't do that, because no matter what you do, you who worked hard will end up the same place as the person who did absolutely nothing. And I mean a person who is incapable of doing nothing because they're physically handicapped or disabled, but I mean someone who just didn't choose to not do anything. Well, you have people who have what's called learned helplessness. They learn, if I'm helpless, someone will come and rescue me. Devastating to our country as well. So these aspects have come through and really forced upon us by an ignorance among leaders of politics who have pushed that upon the people, and then said, oh, look, we have these mental health problems. We need more counselors. Well, you have counselors not really trained of how to handle this. Not only not trained how to handle trauma, but if they're anti-God and anti-religion, they're anti the very thing that people need. Can you imagine if someone was, I'm against medication, all medication? Well, some medication you may need to heal. And so it's a bad thing to do, but that's what was happening, and that's what is happening in this country. So mental health problems have grown, and yet we haven't taken care of it really. There's a lot we can be doing. One is, it'd be great if leadership says, look, I get it that you may be suffering, but there's hope, and focus on the hope, and focus on work and getting up every day and saying, tough, it's not fair, but you can keep going, keep trying. But if on the other hand, leaders say, life is tough and it's unfair, so we're going to make sure we're just going to give you things. And if you're mad, go and burn the town down, or get mad at someone, or take their car from them, or loot. It's terribly devastating. And that adds to our anxiety and worries like, well, what does it matter? What does it mean? That is part of the cultural shift that has occurred here in the last 5 years, which is awful. And you mentioned about gender dysphoria. One of the great, and I'll call it what it is, one of the great lies that people have been told is all this anxiety and worry that many adolescents and children have must be that they're confused about their gender. Well, this wasn't around before. Where there's some people that in life thought, maybe I like being more male identified or female identified, and they had a chance later in life to dress as they wanted, to do what they wanted. But people started putting this on the minds of 3 and 4-year-olds. And if a 3 or 4-year-old liked the color pink, boy, if he liked to play with dolls, oh, you must really be a girl. And they started that process going through a case here at a town next to me where a teacher came in and said to her, I'm not sure it was kindergarten or first grade class, that, oh, I'm so proud my son, he wants to be a girl, so it's going to happen. That she read the kids a book on that. Parents protested, the school board backed the teacher. Well, what has happened is in this that we've pushed the idea to children that if you're concerned about your gender, you must have gender dysphoria. And so therefore start on the path of hormone blockers, so your body never matures according to your gender. Then take hormone replacements where you're going to, if you're a boy, you'll take estrogen, if you're a girl, you take testosterone, and go through surgical procedures for the boy, castrate them, for the girl, hysterectomy, mastectomy. And in the youth years and the teenage years. Now, this is where this is lunacy. They would tell people, and I think Elon Musk talks about that with his son, daughter, that they said, would you rather have a living daughter than a dead son? This was a common phrase pushed out there by the organization. Push this. And they said, because there's a high suicide thought rate, high suicide rate. Well, there is a high suicide rate, a high suicide thought rate among people who are depressed. Okay. But that doesn't mean that the answer is castration, hysterectomies. So I was attending a conference in Pennsylvania with the Pennsylvania Psychological Association about this last year. And they said, in order to help a child talk about this, decorate your office with rainbow flags and pride flags and other things there so the child felt comfortable. See the child alone and not with the parents, especially if the parents weren't supportive. And they said, and we know how to handle religion. If the kid says, I'm concerned about religion, we'll talk them out of that. And then refer the child to be around peer groups of other kids who identify as LGBTQ process. So you're taking kids at a time in their life. We know what peer pressure can do. We know the kids don't even know who they want to be in life. One day they want to be a policeman, fireman, milkman, pilot, whatever they want to do. And so we're putting this peer pressure on them. So that's going to influence them. So it becomes a fulfilling prophecy. And so these people were presenting this conferences. Well, then you write a letter and so support that the doctor do these things. So they may talk to someone a few times and then go ahead and write this. Now, so I raised my hand. I said, well, does this take care of the depression and suicidal thoughts? They said, yes. I said, can you give me some data on that? What does it do? Well, it gets better. I said, well, your whole argument pivots on this, that would you rather have a living daughter or a dead son, or a living son or a dead daughter? What do you want? And his will gets better. I said, that's the key thing. Quote me the study. They couldn't do it. Well, as it turns out, that same time, July of 2023, a study came out of Denmark. They have medical records they keep on everybody in their data system there. And they were for decades. And so they followed tens of thousands of people who've gone through these concerns. And what they found was this, that among those who make a transition of gender, they have a 700% higher rate of a suicide attempt that requires medical attention, 7 times greater. Now, those are ones that attempt that required medical attention. That doesn't mean, that means they didn't catch those who had a suicide attempt that didn't go to the hospital. That's only those who did. And then the other one is a 3.5 times greater suicide death. Those are the people who made the transition. So when we tell kids and tell parents, oh, you'll be better off. No, the data doesn't support that. Then you hear people like Governor Tim Walz in Minnesota saying, oh, well, the science is behind us. And so it's so bad when parents don't agree with us that what they want to say is, well, we'll just take away the rights of children. California did the same thing. Take away the rights of parents. Parents are not allowed to interfere. If parents say, no, I'm not going to go through this transition stuff, the children are taken from them, become wards of the state. That is such a devastating, corrupt thing to do. We know the long-term and short-term effects of having someone taken from their parents' hands. Even if the parents are struggling and maybe neglectful, Children Youth Services surround that family to try and help. And it should be the last step to take them away. But even then, you try and have some visitation. But in these cases, saying, you got no say-so. Start using these chemicals on your chemically castrate them, change them. Awful. So Now, adding these things together, why is it? Because we have a society that is looking for quick fixes, surgical fixes, et cetera, and doesn't want to look at the long-term things. And we're no longer asking the scientific questions. I mean, seriously, among my colleagues in psychology, there's a daily email that comes out. People can post whatever they want on there. And psychologists who started to post, I really question this. The research is not there to support these things you're saying. What we got was an email that said, you're hurting people who are themselves part of the LGBTQ community. People were not attacking that person, but saying the science is not there. We were told you cannot post anything else. They were going to scrub all those. No one was allowed to question it anymore. And if you did, they were going to refer you. You had to go for counseling. In other words, they had this mental education like they did in communist China or North Korea or Vietnam. To me, it's unbelievable that people who are supposed to be trained in science are doing this, because in science, we should always be questioning. I mean, in your career, you question a few things. And
Absolutely.
If you did not question, truth doesn't come out. So it's harmful to us. So those things are all added up. I mean, it's a long-winded answer to what you're saying, but it's important to understand. No wonder we feel this sense of angst and anxiety. The rules have changed. We don't know what truth is anymore. Well, actually, we do know what truth is if we have faith, but they're trying to shut that down too.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something earlier too. You were talking about the peer pressure, but this is not even peer pressure, because it's pressure coming from people in authority in these children's lives, whether it's their teachers or whether it's their, the psychiatrists or the in some cases the parents, that are pressuring these kids to comply with with these norms that are not norms at all, that are actually harmful. So I'm glad that that you brought that you got into the in depth on that, because I think this is probably one of the largest mental health crises that our country has ever faced, and I worry that if we don't snap out of this, basically where psychology is being driven not by science but by by a political agenda, from the intersectionalists, that it has the potential to destroy our country. I really do fear that. We're seeing that it's destroying families. I've met a lot of people who are dealing with that particular issue, even in their own families, whether it's grandchildren or everybody knows somebody who's got a kid that's dealing with that. We need to cut to a commercial break to give a word to our sponsors, but
Sure.
we're going to be right back. And folks, stay with us. We've got a lot more to get into, and we'll be back in a short minute here.
Not believe, no detergent, no hot water, no fabric softener. Now you even threw away all the chemicals to clean your home. I don't need to buy spray to cut through grease. I don't need to buy window cleaners. I don't need to buy carpet shampoo. I don't need to buy things to mop my floor. I don't need to buy things to take pesticide off my vegetables, fruits, and fish. Oh my gosh, where did this come from? I'll tell you where it came from. It came from hospitals. This is actually a photo of a huge commercial hospital laundry technology that cost in excess of $100,000 if you bought that whole thing, and it'll fill up your garage. That's how big it is. And what we've done with the advent of microelectronic technology, my team and I constantly use microtechnology just like your smartphone. The new EcoWasher SE is a chemical-free laundry and cleaning solution. Imagine, no more detergent, no more chemicals, saves you money, pays for itself, gives you a healthier life, and simplifies doing laundry. And now we're going to include 2 free ThunderPure Safe Air Minis that purifies your home and sanitizes your surfaces like a thunderstorm in nature, eliminates all odors. Plus, you're receiving $100 off by using code podcast on the new EcoWasher SE. Let me remind you, 2 free ThunderPure Safe Air Minis plus $100 off during this podcast. Podcast is your coupon code at
military use when they need unlimited power during critical missions. Civilians like you can now get their hands on the exact same technology within 24 hours for pennies on the dollar. Folks, as a former infantry soldier, I can tell you this is the best and cheapest way to get reliable, unlimited energy. And no, I'm not talking about regular generators or the expensive solar panels. You don't have to be an electrician to do it. There's no maintenance needed. It doesn't take up a lot of space. And the best part, you won't need to rely on the power grid anymore. Click below now and hit play.
Born in the coastal plains of South Texas, Smoking Gun Coffee is founded by combat veterans that know exactly what a cup of coffee needs to taste like. Run by father and son, each coffee bean is perfected, roasted at 500 degrees, and cooled with a Gulf Coast breeze. Smoking Gun Coffee hand makes and bags each ounce of coffee for maximum customer satisfaction. With every purchase, 10% goes back to organizations that help veterans and local communities. That's Texas made, one bag at a time. To find out more, go to www.smokingguncoffee.com.
Welcome back to the Raising Cane Show. I'm your host, Nate Kane, and we're here with Dr. Murphy. We've been going through and talking about some of the health challenges that we've been facing as a nation, and in particular his area of expertise, which has been dealing with PTSD. So, Doctor, before we went to break, we were getting into talking about a lot of these issues that have been happening just generally, in our nation and particularly within our culture. You've been a strong advocate for mental health reform during your time in Congress. How do you think the landscape of mental health care has changed over the years, and especially with the passage of Helping Families and Mental Health Crisis Act? What are your thoughts on that, and what do you see as really, where things have gone, or maybe I should say on awry?
Yeah, that bill that you mentioned, the Helping Families and Mental Health Crisis Act. I wrote that. I pushed that through Congress. It had a lot of major reforms in it. In fact, it passed the House 422-2, a nearly unanimous vote, and went on to the Senate and came back to the House. It had a lot of great reforms in it. Some were stripped out, but for the most part, we didn't get everything we needed, but we needed everything we got. And here's a few things that are important. The key federal agency called Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA, had lost its way. It was not taking care of serious mental illness like psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar illness, and it was focusing more upon let's be happy. I mean, literally having funding programs to teach kids to sing songs to be happy, how to make a fruit smoothie, how going for a walk was great. Hey, those are great, but do we want to spend federal dollars on that? But totally ignoring serious mental illness. Now, what that meant is if you look at the mass shooters, for example, half or more of these mass shootings occurred by someone who has untreated psychosis, untreated for a number of reasons. We started closing the hospitals down in this nation in the 70s, 60s under John F. Kennedy. His last bill he signed was to begin this transition to community mental health and not the big hospitals. And then one by one, states started to go through and close them off. I went to, you're in West Virginia. I went to college in West Virginia. And I remember visiting when I was there, a long time ago, 70s or so, some of these places, and they looked awful because the state didn't put money into them. Well, they basically all closed down. And so many of these people who have severe mental illness, part of the condition of this severe mental illness, like schizophrenia, is they're unaware that they have a mental illness, and they're unaware that they're unaware. The condition is called anosognosia. So many times people who are seeing hallucinations or hearing voices or delusions, they don't even know it's not normal. And so many of the homeless, about 30% of the homeless may have severe mental illness like schizophrenia, even though it's only 1% of the population. 30% of homeless level of mental illness, from depression, anxiety to severe mental illness. But what happens is liberal governments have said, well, we don't want to force them to get care. Now, I'm not saying you take people and put them in jail, but actually that's what we end up doing. When someone starts getting rough and violent, the police show up. If you look at some of these fatal police encounters, it's someone who is probably mentally ill and not treated. Anyways, they end up in jail. And then if they fight back up against the police, now they have an assault charge against them. They may have been wandering through Walmart and picking up things because they're hearing voices telling them to do that. Next thing you know, they're in a fight with the police officer, charged with assault. Go to prison, fight with the prison guard, another assault. They put them in solitary confinement. But what has happened with some of the liberal prosecutors, they'll say, just put them back on the street and let's not force them into treatment. So one of the things my bill did, there's something called assisted outpatient treatment. And that means a judge could say, you're so severely mentally ill, you can't care for yourself, we're going to put you in a hospital. But we don't have hospital beds anymore. We used to have 500,000 back in the 1950s when the 120 million with 320 million of the population, we had like 30-some thousand hospital beds. So there's no place to put them. So hospitals discharge them right away back in the streets, oftentimes not on medication. And we know if they're not on medication, they have more problems. So assisted outpatient treatment is a judge can say, look, you are court mandated to get care, to get your medication, to go to counseling. And also what states could be doing is, and towns and counties could be doing is help people have housing. But what a lot of these places do, California is one of the most devastating on this, is they say, well, we're going to give you a blanket and a food card, go to McDonald's, but we're not going to force you to have anything. And if we do put you in some building arrangement, because they got billions of dollars that can do this, they're oftentimes deplorable conditions, deplorable. Those that work are to say, we'll help you with housing, but there's someone at the front desk you're going to check in with every day. And they'll make sure you're taking medication, or you have some job you're going to go to if you can work. Those are the places that work well. Those are the people who do well. But a lot of states for a long time said, well, we're not going to do this AOT thing because you're coercing. Think of it this way. People with Alzheimer's or dementia, they're not aware that they have a problem. We've seen it on the public stand where someone just keeps saying, I'm fine, I can think well, but they're not. So that's a similar kind of thing, this anosognosia. So helping people with severe mental illness is extremely important. So my bill put some money into that. We elevated the level of the office of SAMHSA to an assistant secretary of mental health. Things are going along well. But then the next administration, Biden administration, took over. They put people in charge who are more concerned about giving people the right to refuse treatment than the right to get treatment. And things went downhill. To the agency, even saying, there's not much we can do with psychosis. There's a lot we can do. There's a lot we can do to help someone. Not a cure yet, but there's a lot we can do. And so when you look at some of the continued problems that go on with people with severe mental illness, the difficulties we have as a society, the problems with homelessness, I'm in a lot of despair that we've ignored them. We've dumped them out back in the street to be homeless. It's awful. We've gone back to what was happening in this country over a century ago to causing these problems again. So those reforms, we still need to do more because drug abuse is still a major issue. And you do a couple of things. One, you stop at the border. You close the borders. You make sure you're screening everything. We have more drug treatment out there. But a lot of what's happening too in some cities, I know in Philadelphia, they have open needle areas. Do whatever you want, shoot up, and lots of drugs. It's, we're being kind because they're not putting them in jail. No, it's destroying.
And I have a personal experience with that issue. I ran for Congress in this last primary, and I did not win. But we did a lot. My wife and I campaigned all over, and we did a lot of talking to people, a lot of grassroots, type of stuff. And one of the things that we talked to two different women who both were had been hooked on heroin and who were clean for more than a decade. And I asked both of them, what was the trick? What helped you to get clean? And interestingly enough, both of them said the same thing. They both said that the needle exchange and the methadone treatments, none of that stuff helps. It just makes it worse. That it was the threat of losing their children, the threat of going to jail is what caused them to turn around. And it was also faith in God, and finding God that helped them to, get clean and stay clean. So, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure some of this stuff out, that if you provide, support in moving people in the right direction, that you can help them. But if you're going to basically, give them access to drugs, that it's going to make things worse. But for some reason, there's some folks in government that don't seem to understand that. And I don't think they're looking at any kind of data to quantify their decisions for why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, I think what they do, one of the things that you're looking at is the matrix, or excuse me, the standard of, if we don't arrest people, they don't go to jail, and we don't want people to go to jail because jail is not treatment. But you were very careful. You said it was not jail. It was a threat of that. Says,
right.
if you're in jail, we're going to help you dry out, but you're going to be getting treatment. The expectation is you get better. Now, in West Virginia, that's where the whole opioid epidemic began. Small towns in Western West Virginia, doctors were prescribing massive amounts of drugs well beyond the population of those small towns.
Sure.
And you had places that were hooked and dying fast. And it spread across the country before people even stopped to say, what's going on with these drugs? So it is wrong what people are doing to say, just give them needles. I understand clean needles, they don't spread disease, but it should be, we're going to get you in a drug treatment program, you can get better. But when governments say to people, we don't expect you to get better, if you want, it's all free. You can do whatever you want with drugs or whatever you want with your body, but you must comply with these other things. We're going to tell you how to think, where you go to church, what you can do day to day. But if you want to destroy yourself with drugs, it's fine. That's such a perverse way of looking at people with that they're not worth saving, and totally misunderstanding how to handle the drug problem. You have to have the expectation people can get better. I tell people all the time, I ask them, do you want to heal or do you want to hurt? And if they tell me they want to heal, I said, all right, you're already headed on the right road. If they say, I don't really know yet, because they don't have the confidence or the belief that they can get better, well, we have to get there. But if the government, if the leaders are saying, we don't think you can get better, we're just going to let you have drugs on the street and sleep in the street, and that's going to be there. That's why things have continued to get so bad in so many American cities. And that's why it's not just fentanyl coming over the border, but it's the access that people have in their towns. We're told the police are told, don't the drugs away. And then people say, oh, isn't this strange? People are overdosing and dying. I'm not sure they care.
Yeah. I want to also shift. There's a couple of questions I want to get to. One of them is about Fortis Future. You founded Fortis Future, which is a center focused on veterans and first responders. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that's being done there, and why is it so crucial to have specialized care for these particular groups?
Well, thanks. So Fortis is the Latin word for strong, and we've all heard of Semper Fi, which is the Marine Corps. A lot of people don't know the Navy. I was a Navy officer. Our saying is Semper Fortis, always strong. And we tease the Marines with that. You guys may be faithful. We're strong. Our ships are stronger. But what I want people to know is that Fortis Futures, you have a strong future ahead of you. There's things you can do. Veterans, the 1% of volunteers for service. That takes a lot of risk. Sometimes they want a better life. Sometimes they want to escape some life. Sometimes they serve the country. But you still have a very high suicide rate among people who served. And by the way, these are not people in combat now. These people may be never deployed, but people who struggle. The VA a couple of years ago began to falsify data that it used to be, we thought that 22 suicides a day occurred. And then magically it suddenly dropped to 18 a day, 17 something a day. And the way that happened was the VA says, you know what, we're not going to count National Guard or Reserve anymore. Boom. And the National Guard and Reserve had some of the highest suicide rates because not only were they doing their military work, but they had access to guns. They had families they were taking care of. They had work issues too. So, but my point is the VA doesn't take care of everybody. And the VA certainly will not handle anything having to do with faith or religion. And of the Americans who were served, most of them do not go to a VA hospital for care. Most do not. So as a civilian now, but as a Navy officer, in conjunction with a guy who was named John Kolb, former Pittsburgh Steeler, back in the 70s when we had all those great Super Bowl years, John was an offensive lineman, protected Terry Bradsshaw's blindside. People don't know this, but while he was a Steeler, he joined the National Guard. So he would go off and do drill weekends because he thought, well, Rocky Blyer's in Vietnam, I'm not there. So he handles all these intensive fitness programs for our veterans and first responders. I handle the counseling. And I want to show you something here. When you're military, you get a patch to put on your shoulder. So this is the patch. Let me see if I can put it up there so you can see it. That I made for us. So you see a tree that's been cut down, but it's growing back stronger. So the branches are lifting up defiantly to say, I'm growing, I can be better. The roots, those 4 roots are referred to as mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Like in the Bible, it says you love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, your strength, your heart. And And by the way, those little leaves on there, those are, gotta get this right. Those are the same shape as the Navy's oak leaf that which we wear on our lapel, the medical corps. But as part of the reminder, you're going to get better. Job, in the book of Job, he talks about at least there's hope for a tree, so that even though it's cut down at the first sign of moisture, it grows back and blossoms again. I want people to see the same thing in their lives. So we do that, work on mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual strength of people. People get better. We have a very high success rate in that. We provide that care. If people can't afford it, we provide it. We rely on a lot of donations from people for that. In fact, sales of my book, The Christ Cure, I take the proceeds from that. It's not a lot per book, but I take the proceeds of that and use that to support some of our veterans of the program. And I might as well say my website is drtimmurphy.com, drtimmurphy.com. And you can order the book from there or from Amazon. And last week it was like #1 among Christian counseling books and #4 among PTSD books. So it's a good book for people to read, not just if you're struggling yourself. I like to say it's a handbook for the broken and for those who love them, and also a handbook for counselors and clergy who want to learn how to do these things.
So on that note,
as a way of supporting our program for veterans.
So on that note, for our listeners who may be struggling with trauma or know someone who is, what advice would you give them? Obviously, they can go to your website, they can buy your book, but what practical advice can you give them right now? How can they begin the journey to healing?
One is make that decision that you want to heal. Even if you don't know how to get there, that's okay. A compass tells us there's a direction to go to, even though we don't know it's over the horizon. So make that a choice. Have a choice of hope. Even if it's just a possibility of possibilities, even if you barely know that, choose hope is much better than hopelessness. It's important physically to get out, be active, walk, exercise, do things, get regular sleep, stop the alcohol, stop the marijuana. Marijuana actually triggers more depression and more anxiety, although big cannabis growers say, oh, it's a healing for that. It's not. It actually also increases schizophrenia and psychosis. Among adolescents, about 11 times greater incidence of schizophrenia. Stay away from it. It's very potent. Don't try and self-medicate. Be around other people. Do not isolate. Meet with friends. And as you have experienced your own life, you got to talk about it. We try and isolate. I know what this is like. I don't want to talk to anybody about my own feelings, my own traumas, my own embarrassments, my own guilt and shame. Nobody wants to talk about that. But even when friends abandon you, Nate, you got it. Eventually someone will come by who understands. I mean, I've been found among some churches very welcoming, very positive, and some other ones like, oh, wow, you're here. Look, because they talk about forgiveness in general, but not the specific. We have to understand God forgives. Others might. I must. You open the show with saying forgiveness is important. We got to be able to forgive ourselves. Even if we don't know how, it's a road to take. And that's one of the ways we're going to get better. I guarantee it. That's
right. So you mentioned your website where people can go to, follow what you're doing. Do you have any upcoming projects or initiatives that you're excited about that you're working on? And then also, do you have social media that people can follow you on social media?
Yeah, my main social media I use is LinkedIn. That's Dr. Tim-Murphy, Dr. Tim Murphy, okay. That way. That's where I'll post a lot of my things. I've stayed away from Facebook for various reasons. I don't post much on there, but LinkedIn, Dr. Tim Murphy. And also on my website, which is drtimmurphy.com, drtimmurphy.com. I'll put a lot of the posts on there. I write for American Spectator, so I've written articles there about how the VA juggles the numbers or falsifies the numbers with suicides, and also about gender dysphoria. I wrote about what was the mental health system's breakdown that led to the suicide attempt against President Trump. We don't know a lot, but we'll put some things out there for that. So that's where I post my things at drtimmurphy.com is the main place for that. And I do some podcasts there as well, so people can hear more. I give talks at churches, at retreats. I'm always happy to go out and do that. People can reach me through my website too.
That's great. So we're at the top of the hour here, and I always like to give the final word to my guest. If there's one thing that you want people to take away from this talk that we've had tonight, what would that be? In the book of Romans, a letter of Romans that Paul wrote, he says in Romans 12:2, to be transformed
by a renewing of your mind. We can't keep doing the same way and get caught up in the old ways of the world. Change is valuable because if nothing changes, right? We will remain with our problems. But there is great hope in that. And I want people to understand there is hope. I've seen it. I've seen people come through the worst of circumstances and come out better. I know what it's like to live in hell. I know what it's like to wish that I didn't wake up in the morning, that God took me or my life ended. Never attempted it, but passively didn't want it. But I also know what it's like to come out and one day, instead of cursing the dawn, to welcoming the dawn. So I want people to know that you have hope. Hope they read my book, hope they pray, hope they work with each other. And I pray for you. We're going to get better, but we got to work at it. And Nate, thank you so much for talking about this subject. A lot of people won't talk about it. We want to talk about glitzy things, but this is what's going to save a lot of lives. So
I agree. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us as well. And I always end my show in prayer because I recognize that, we have to do our part, but we also need the help and the hand of God in everything that we do. And so I always like to, that's my staying humble and recognizing that we need his help. After the show, if you don't mind hanging on, I'd like to chat with you a little bit more offline.
Sure.
But if you've got time, and I'm working on some initiatives here. And you're up in Pennsylvania. Are you still up there now?
Yeah, I'm in Pittsburgh. Yes, the southwest part of the state.
Great. So I'm working on some initiatives now here in West Virginia, and there's some things that I think you might be interested in, and I'd love to get you, to come speak at one of these events. So, with that, I'm going to close in prayer, and then we'll close the show. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you so much for Dr. Murphy and for this opportunity to have him on. Lord, I pray your blessing would be on him and his practice and the initiative that he has going, Lord, with his organization. I pray continue to bless those that come into contact with him, Lord, and help him to be a light in this often dark world. Lord, I pray for all of those who are listening to this show right now, Lord, that are struggling with mental illness, Lord, or who are struggling with depression or trauma. I pray, Lord, that you would help them to find help, and that you would help them to put their hope in you. Lord, I know I could not have gone through all the things that I've gone through and made it out without your help. And Lord, I just I pray, God, that you would please turn our country around in the area of mental health, especially when it comes to our youth, and who seem to be just bombarded with so much right now, Lord. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Raise some cane. You gotta raise some cane. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some cane, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change. Time is now. We gotta raise some cane.